Picture this. You're at home after a long day of work or school, and you don't have any other housework or homework that you have to do. You have some time to play some video games and unwind, getting away from the stresses of your day-to-day life, even if just for a little while. You could play lots of different kinds of games. Fantasy RPGs that allow you to have incredible powers that you could never wield in your real life. Or strategy games that allow you to take control of entire nations, and you get to make the decisions about what happens. Those games can be quite enjoyable as well. But if you're like me, then in this scenario, you often turn to survival games. Games in which you are thrust into an apocalyptic scenario with minimal resources and anxiety-inducing difficulty, with the simple goal of surviving. Games where you have to grind tirelessly to make small incremental improvements to your character, and even small mistakes could lead to death and other massive consequences. In some survival games, like The Long Dark, death means the end of your character and losing everything that you've collected and accomplished so far. So what then is it about these games that makes them so enjoyable? First and most obviously is that as human beings, we desire to overcome challenges. We want to accomplish hard things, and survival games give us an opportunity to do so without having to risk any actual bodily harm. Yes, you may lose a bunch of gear or time if hunger, zombies, or the environment takes you down, but ultimately you as a person are still safe. But it can't just be the challenge of the game, because lots of other genres of games can be challenging as well. There's something specific about the setting and the gameplay loop of the typical survival games that is uniquely enjoyable. The game loop of a typical survival game generally includes gathering resources to build up some sort of base or shelter and protect yourself against an ever-increasing external threat. For many survival games, this external threat is zombies. Two of my favorite examples being 7 Days to Die and State of Decay. In 7 Days to Die, the primary threat is the zombies and the specialty zombies themselves, being heightened on each 7th night when a horde comes to attack your base. Though you do still need to find food and water in 7 Days to Die, it's really a secondary concern, as it's fairly easy to get your hands on water and food, unless you were doing some sort of special region-locked challenge. State of Decay is unique amongst zombie survival games because rather than only caring about your own food, water, and shelter, you're instead trying to care for an entire community. This adds its own unique kind of challenge, as if you do not properly equip your community, they can die even when you're not taking control of them. I recently did a challenge run for State of Decay 2, where I attempted to beat the Providence Ridge map on lethal difficulty without losing any of my community members. One of the most difficult aspects of that run was that if I had an attack on my base, there was only so much that I could do to prevent my other community members from getting killed by the zombies, which forced me to change my strategy and focus on preventing sieges from ever happening in the first place, putting high priority on defeating siege sites ahead of time. I think that it's things like this that are one of the reasons survival games are so enjoyable. Games are fun when they can be unpredictable and force you to change your strategy on the go. And the challenges that evolve throughout the game create a constant gameplay loop of improving yourself and improving your strategy. But also, quite simply, it's pretty fun to blast zombies. So I want to look at another game, which is in my opinion a survival game in the truest sense, The Long Dark. The Long Dark has only one objective: survive. Yes, it technically has a campaign story mode, but to be honest, I've never actually played it. In The Long Dark, you are stranded in the Canadian wilderness after some sort of geomagnetic disaster, and you wake up in the freezing cold with minimal clothing and nothing but a metal can to help you survive, depending, of course, on what difficulty you're playing on. But this game is really meant to be played on the hardest difficulty that you can handle. There are no zombies and no monsters. There are fairly aggressive wolves and bears, but most areas of the game, those are not your main concern. Your main concern is the cold itself. Unlike many other survival games, food and water are much harder to come by, and simply standing outside for too long will lead to your demise. On harder difficulties, it is sometimes better to allow your character to starve during the day, so that you can regain more condition loss during the night by sleeping than you lost by starving during the day. Essentially, min-maxing your caloric intake. Everything about this game is designed to make survival as difficult as possible. You cannot sleep to pass time unless you are actually tired. Crafting is much more difficult than other survival games, taking time just as all other actions in the game do, and extra calories. For example, making a survival bow, what in many other games, including 7 Days to Die, is a tutorial item crafted in the first 5 minutes, is basically a mid to late game item in the long dark. To make a bow, you must first find scrap metal, find coal, find a heavy hammer, which is the hardest part, find one of the game's few forges, forge improvised tools, forge arrowheads, chop down a sapling and allow it to cure for multiple in-game days. Also kill and gut animals and let their guts cure for a couple of in-game days. And then finally, with a workbench, you can craft a bow and some arrows, both of which require multiple hours of in-game time to craft. After all of that, you will have a bow and arrow and the ability to hunt animals larger than rabbits, giving you a somewhat consistent source of food and pellets to craft the game's warmer clothing items. This game is designed to be brutal. You cannot even open a can of food without a can opener, or you will lose a percentage of the food from smashing the can open. And so taking all of this into account, I ask myself, why could I possibly enjoy this kind of game? I think that my and many others' fascination with survival games, TV shows, and movies stems from our innate human desire to survive in a world where most of our basic survival needs are taken care of. I consider myself incredibly blessed to have a roof over my head and food in my belly, as so many throughout human history and even today that struggle with homelessness and food insecurity have to struggle daily to attempt to secure food and shelter. For those of us who already have access to those things in real life, I think there's some part of our subconscious that still kind of wants to prove to ourselves that if all of that was taken away, we could find a way to survive. Now, sure, we may know logically that surviving in a video game does not equate to real-life survival skills, but we still seem to get a sense of accomplishment in keeping our virtual characters living. But what are your thoughts? Am I overthinking this, and in reality the games are just fun and it's that simple? Or do you think there's something about the human resolve to survive against all odds that fascinates us, even in the form of a video game? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.